Good morning on this Wednesday, April 29th, as we continue our series on the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22. Last week we did an introduction and talked a little bit about love. Today we're going to talk about joy and peace. We're going to be looking at David and Jesus in the situations that they're facing and where they talk about joy and peace. Um, we're going to start with joy. Um, Many times joy and happiness are confused, and I just kind of want to start with that. For me, joy is based on a source, something that's consistent, um, something that doesn't change, where happiness is based on change, it's based on what is happening in our lives, right? We are happy um, when situations happen for me. So, like, I think about when have I been the happiest? When my children were born, when I got married, when different things like that in life happens, we find happiness. But happiness is not always consistent where joy can be if we're focused on the source of where joy comes from. With that, we're going to look at David in Psalm 16. Now, I want to share kind of what's going on with David in Psalm 16 because, again, things are not all good for David when he's writing these verses that we're going to look at. David is being chased by Saul. Saul is trying to take his life. David finds himself on one side of a mountain while while Saul is on the other side looking for him to take his life. As we look at Proverbs, we're going to focus on a verse, Proverbs 16:11, but I'm going to start on verse 8. It says, I know the Lord is always with me. I will not be shaken, for he is right beside me. No wonder my heart is glad and I rejoice. My body rests in safety, for you will not leave my soul among the dead, or allow your Holy One to rot in the ground. And then verse 11, you will show me the way of life, granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. David understood where joy comes from. And I think many times we can lose focus of this. But even in David's struggle and uncertainty of even his life, David says, my joy is found in the presence and the pleasure of living with you forever. David knew that he would be with Jesus forever. And that's where his source of joy came from. And that's where our source of joy should also flow from. It's a consistent thing knowing that we at some point will live with Jesus forever. And even now as Christians on earth, we live in a relationship and in the promise of Jesus. And even in struggle, even with uncertainty, even with things that are happening, our source does not change. And I think that's important to remember even in times of trial and struggle is our source is still the same. And we can find joy in that source. Um, the next fruit of the Spirit is peace. Um, and I want to look again at Jesus in John 16. Jesus is about to face great trial, even the loss of his life. And Jesus is speaking in John 16:33, and he says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And many of us have heard that verse, we know it, um, but we struggle in trials to live it. Now, what's what's about to happen to Jesus. As we know, Jesus is about to face trial and his death. Um, and he is telling his disciples and those around him that you can find peace. Well, where does that peace come from? Uh, that peace comes with a relationship with Jesus Christ. Um, he's, he's also telling them and kind of foreshadowing for himself that we will have trouble, right? And that Jesus is about to face trouble himself. Um, but even in that, he finds peace in his relationship with God, and we can find peace in our relationship with Jesus Christ with the understanding that he has overcome the world. And at this moment, as he shares this verse, I think it might have been tough for people to understand because he hasn't um, died and rose again and forgiven us from our sins. So we understand the end story of this and how God has overcome the world, where we can even find more peace than maybe in the situation that Jesus is speaking to at this time. But in conclusion, you are going through trials. We are going through trials. Things are happening around us that are hard to see, both as a country and individually. Um, but where's your source? Because joy and peace can be found in a source. Joy and peace are not affected by the things that go on around us. Joy and peace are planted firmly in the understanding that Jesus Christ is in control and never changes, and his plans don't change even in trials. So as you go about your week, try to focus on the source of what brings you joy and peace, and not so much on the circumstances that will continually change in your lives. See you next week.